The summer I learned to listen came on the day the harbour held its breath. Grandfather liked to say that the sea never forgot a joke, and if you listened long enough, she would tell you what the world wanted from you, whether you were ready to hear or not. He spoke in a soft, weathered cadence, the kind of voice that settled into your bones and stayed there, like the warmth after a too long winter. We stood on the old wooden quay, where the boards hummed with age and wet, where the smell of salt dried into the throat, and the tar on the pilings kept time with the clack of rusted hinges. The sun hung thick and generous above the harbour, spilling coins of light that stitched themselves into the water's slow silver fabric. I was 10, and full of questions I didn't yet know how to ask. My pockets were full of marbles, coins, a sliver of a pencil, and a stubborn belief that bravery looked like a boy sprinting past the nets with a single thread of rope flung over his shoulder. Grandfather's hands were large, fingertips stained with oil and squid ink, his nails smelling faintly of lemon oil and something like home. He set a coil of rope at my feet and tipped his hat back with a knowing smile. "Today you'll learn to hear," he said, not unkindly, as if I'd spent the hours before listening to the world cough and snort in its sleep, and needed to be reminded of the obvious. "Not with your ears alone, lad. With your hands, your eyes, the breath you take between one sound and the next. Listen for what the boats don't say." We worked on a little skiff that had seen better days, planks tired from years of salt and rain, a faded name barely legible along its stern. Serena, perhaps, or something that could almost be a memory if you squinted. The boat's belly smelled like seaweed and damp wood, a scent that clung to your skin long after you left the water. Grandfather showed me how to mend a tear in the sail with careful stitches, how to align a nail with the hammer's patient rhythm, how to test the balance of ballast by the quiet tilt of the boat as you pressed your palm along its side. The harbour's sounds braided themselves into a chorus that day. The gulls cried overhead, their calls slicing through the droning murmur of businessmen and fishermen at work. A distant bell tolled from the old church, slow and reverent, as if it remembered every day that had passed under its shadow. A boy laughed somewhere down the quay, his joy a bright sting that made the air feel lighter. And the sea, that eternal translator, moved with a patient, glacial insistence, turning the earth's edge into a silvered mouth that seemed to speak in sighs and breath. We finished the sail that afternoon and settled into a kind of domestic quiet, with a tin of tea and 2 chipped cups that clinked when you set them down. I watched Grandfather's hands, rough from work and weather, cradle a teacup as if it was something delicate, something that could vanish with a blink. He leaned toward me, and the grey of his eyes grew very serious, almost tender in a way that warned me this moment wasn't for bragging or jokes, but for listening, truly listening, to the world's old stories. "Sometimes the best way to understand a thing is to unremember it," he said, settling the cup in his palm. "To let go of what you think you know, and listen for what's left when you are quiet. You'll hear it in the creak of the boat, in the tide's stubborn pull, in the breath of another soul, if you're not afraid to wait." That was the sentence that lengthened my spine, pressed a map into my chest, and sent a slow, careful current through me that day. It sounds almost stagey now, all the words laid out like a trail of breadcrumbs, but I swear, the world understood and conspired to give me a single, small lesson I could carry forever. Listening creates paths where there were only walls. Evening settled into the harbour like a soft shawl. The air cooled and the water wore a glassy gleam, as if the sun hadn't quite chosen to descend. It was then that we found the bottle, a stout glass bottle with a cork scuffed by sand and time, half buried by driftwood. It had probably rolled ashore with the last night's storm, a stray object tossed into a story it hadn't asked to be part of. Grandfather picked it up gently, as if handling a fragile creature, and wiped the sand from its neck. Inside the bottle lay a brittle sheet of paper, edges browned by salt and air. I peered over Grandfather's shoulder as he drew out a thin string that had worked itself through the cork. The handwriting was small and careful, the ink a pale brown that looked as if it had waited decades for someone to notice it again. "Dear Finder," it began, a note from someone long gone, someone who would never know the reader who now held this bottle. The letter told of a little girl who lived in a village beyond the hills, who loved the sea and the sound of rain on tin roofs, who left a bottle beneath a bench by the lighthouse with a hope that a stranger would someday read her words and remember to be kind. The notes grew more intimate after that, a small confession tucked into the margins, a lightness about ordinary days, the way her grandmother's kitchen smelled of vanilla and lemon zest, the way her father's voice was steady as a harbour wall when storms came. The handwriting drifted into a confession that made my chest tight with astonishment. The girl asked the finder to be patient with others, to listen first, to tell the truth even when it hurt, to keep the memory of kindness like a coin pressed into the palm. Then she signed off with a line I've carried with me ever since. "If you find this, please tell someone else a story of your day, so the world keeps turning on the blessing of small kindnesses." We stood in the dimming light, the bottle heavy in my hands, Grandfather's palm hovering near mine as if he wasn't sure who would pass the lesson to whom. The world around us seemed to exhale softly, as if all the boats, all the nets, all the threads of rope had paused to listen as well. I read the words aloud, and the harbour seemed to lean closer to catch the echo. That night, and in the days that followed, that bottle's message began to travel through the weather-roughened corridors of my childhood. I started to see that stories didn't merely exist in books. They travelled through people, through small gestures, a cup of tea left on the sill for a late worker, a child's handful of pebbles offered to a friend, a neighbour's quiet smile across the fence. I learned to be careful with my own words, to measure their weight, to let silence teach what speech cannot. I cannot say I understood everything that summer, only that I began to become someone who listened with more than ears. I grew patient with the world's reluctance to reveal itself, and I learned to trust that goodness didn't require grand declarations, only the steady, faithful practice of noticing, the way a grandmother's fingers moved when she kneaded bread, the way rain sounded on a tin roof, the way a dog would creak open a gate to greet a friend. If there was a gift to that season, it was this. I learned to gather moments the way the boat gathers shell fragments, to make them into something that could carry a person forward when the weather grew harsh. Time, alas, did the inevitable trick of turning summer into memory, and memory into a form of weather we carry within us, soft, persistent, and sometimes bittersweet. Yet the lesson of that bottle remained intact, tucked behind the ribs like a small lantern you light in a shadowed room. I went on to teach, to write, to listen more than I spoke, to hold the stories of students and strangers with an equal tenderness, as if they all carried little bottles somewhere inside them, waiting to be found by someone who would listen. In my old age, I still walk by the same harbour, though the boats are different and the air holds a different salt. I still hear the gulls, still catch the scent of tar and oil when the wind shifts just so. And I still remember the feel of the skiff's wooden ribs beneath my hands, the careful way Grandfather showed me how to trust the boat's breath. When I close my eyes, I can taste the memory of lemon oil and sea salt on my lips, Feel the way the sun pressed heat into the skin, and then receded like a friendly hand guiding me back inside, back toward a long, quiet evening of reading and writing, of listening to the world as though it were a neighbour with a story waiting to be told. If I am old now, it is because I learned to keep a ledger of small kindnesses and to add to it without fanfare, to pass along the lesson without ceremony, to let a bottle's message travel through time, like a thread pulled through the needle of a life. The harbour still teaches me to wait, to watch, to believe in the slow, patient work of being present. And if the world ever grows too loud, I remember that summer and that bottle, and the soft wisdom of grandfather's steady hands, reminding me that the right moment will arrive when the heart is quiet enough to hear it. Time goes on, and I am grateful for the days that taught me to listen. I am grateful for the salt on my tongue, for the ache of memory that keeps me humane, for the simple truth that the smallest gestures, an act of repair, a shared cup of tea, a whispered story, are the threads that hold the fabric of a life together. If meaning can endure, it is because it travels, carried by the kindness of strangers and the affection of family, by the stubborn, patient work of listening until the world reveals what it truly wants from us, to care for one